crack-a-lackin' time here in the bleak midwinter when frosty winds make moan. Guitar soundboards tend to give up and say no more. The patient today is a nice big Takamine built in August of 1978. I looked up the climate averages for Mie Prefecture, where the Takamine factory is located. The temperatures are fantastic. In the late summer, early fall, they do get a lot of rain, and the average relative humidity is somewhere around 85%, which is pretty high, at least when compared to where I live. Around here in a bad summer, it averages around 70% in August. When doing this kind of comparison, you have to recognize that these are figures taken outside, usually beside an airport. Things can be different indoors, and in contemporary guitar factories, we hope they have air conditioning and some kind of humidity control in place. That's not always the case. I've got my little humidifier chugging along, and my shop hygrometer reads 45% at the moment. That's comfortable and safe. If I'm building a guitar and bracing the soundboard or gluing up the box, I try to get it down into the low 30s. That's a preventative measure. I figure if I assemble when the parts are really, really dry, it's like preloading them against future bouts of dryness. Then after assembly, I let the guitar reacclimate at 40 or 45% before doing my setup work. No, I'm not building guitars at this moment. There isn't time in my schedule, so don't ask. In a small shop situation, we can regulate these things and pick our times for certain procedures. In a big time outfit, that's not always the case. You know, they've got international sales deadlines and things. So in the past, before humidity control, there could be a real marked difference between the guitars that came out of a manufacturer made in the wintertime versus the summer. Summer ones can be all full of cracks, where the winter ones will just have pristine soundboards. It's often not possible to trace the season of construction by the serial number on any given guitar, so we're kind of just left to make a guess. This guitar also nicely illustrates a phenomenon I've talked about before. We have a solid piece of spruce for the soundboard, and that has been married to a laminated set of sides and back. Nothing wrong with laminated back and sides. It's an economical and ecological way to use wood in areas that aren't really primary to sound production. Keeps the costs down while letting you have a really pretty piece of veneer on display like we have here. The thing with laminated wood or plywood is it's very dimensionally stable. You've got several pieces glued together with their grain directions countering each other. That equalizes the tension within the wood. It holds them in check and prevents them from shrinking or cracking unless the glue fails, which it sometimes does. So we have this natural, solid material that may have been glued on during a humid time of the year attached to a very rigid, unyielding set of sides and opposite a back which physically can't shrink very much. You know, if the wood dries out too fast or it doesn't have room to contract, it will crack. Incidentally, this is the reason that most flat-top guitars aren't flat. Not really. They're usually built with a bit of an arch in the soundboard. And the braces are flexible enough to allow the arch to collapse a little bit as the soundboard dries out and the tension on it increases. If they were dead flat, there would be no room for the soundboard to move and it would crack immediately. This also means that the setup on an acoustic guitar can vary seasonally. The action will usually be higher in the summertime and lower in the winter. So all this can be regulated to a certain extent by keeping the guitar in its case. That'll slow down the loss of moisture and make it a more gentle process, and generally protecting it from huge swings in humidity. That's why if you live in a climate that gets cold and dry in the winter, it's a good idea to use a sound hole humidifier. And the sad thing, of course, is that really dry guitars tend to sound good. Shh, that's a forbidden statement. Don't try it, Dewey. You don't want no part of that. Let's have a boo. See all that gray atmospheric fuzz and dust and skin cells and particulate matter that was floating around and settled on the intersection of the X brace there? That usually means the guitar was hung up on a wall or on a stand or propped against a dresser for several years without the protection of a case. It's very easy to grab when inspiration strikes you and you want to play. Not so good for preventing cracks. The other thing to know is that all that fluff and goo there has also had a chance to land and get brushed into the cracks as they formed. So if they're old, they can be quite dirty, and glue just doesn't get along very well with dirt, so it's not always the easiest job to get them to stay closed. Let's check the action. Got about 9/64, which is around, well, close to 3.6 millimeters, and 6/64, which is about 2.3 on the treble side. That's pretty high. You would not want them higher. The nice thing is, it looks like we've still got a factory height on the saddle there, so there's plenty of room for it to come down and correct that. The neck relief, with a capo on the first fret, holding the 6th string down at the body joint, and measuring around the 6th and 7th frets, is about 14 thousandths. Maybe a little more, 14 or 15, which is high. We can do better. I just got fooled. The Japanese insistence that a guitar in this category should have a truss rod accessible up at the top end like a Gibson, such that they go to the lengths of producing a cover for a non-existent access point, you know, kind of threw me. So it actually adjusts at the body end. There it is. Looks like a 5mm. Yep, I can feel it's pretty loose too. Okay, after measuring, we're down at 11. Let's take it a bit farther. Okay, that's down around 7. I'm going to stop there. Okay, that has brought the action down to 8/64 on the bass and 5 on the treble. So we're down a 64th, which is good. Didn't mention it before, but this is a model F390MS. Looking at the cracks here, we've got a couple in the upper bout. There's one here that runs its length to the outermost sound hole ring. And there is another one on this side that seems to follow the exact line of the neck block on the inside of the guitar. There also, there's a rather large brace that runs here, which is about 12mm or half an inch wide. And this one up here does go through to the sound hole. It doesn't break the sound hole rings, and there seems to be a bit of a space where it didn't form. So, you know, it's being held in position by a brace here. There's a second brace which is low and wide, similar to a Martin popsicle brace, which runs from the edge of the block close to the lining here as well. So this whole area is actually well supported under there. And the neck block in these guitars has a thick protuberance that goes all the way to the sound hole edge to house the truss rod. So it's pretty solid, but I do want to glue these up. In the lower bout, there's this very obvious one that runs pretty close to the center line of the top, where the two halves were book matched. I don't think the seam actually opened up. It's an actual crack. I say it's old because it's very dark looking, as if it's been oxidized. And I'm not sure, but there may have been some attempt to glue it up previously, because there are areas that seem to be solid and then others that are open. And it's not easy to move in an area where I would expect it to, the two halves to sort of bump up and down. And running parallel to that, about 50mm, 2 inches away, is another crack which might be so fine that you can't even see it. But it's there, and again, I can't get any movement between the two halves, which is actually very encouraging. This, I should say, has been set in a case with two loaded sound hole humidifiers for a couple of weeks now. I really wanted to sort of bump up the humidity in it. You can go too far with that, you know. If you really humidify to extreme lengths and, you know, keep it in conditions of 70 or 80% humidity, take it out and then try to glue it up like that, all of the cracks will have swelled completely shut and it'll look really neat, but as it dries out, more often than not, they'll open up again. So I try to bring it up to like a normal ambient condition that you would find, you know, 45%-ish. So let's get some glue in there. Got a fresh blade in the scalpel here. Try and pick out any dust or debris I can get. It is a tight crack, and it does go all the way through the soundboard. It may not have been glued. It could have just been an illusion caused by the schmutz that was in it. And I usually mention to people that in this kind of crack repair, it's very unlikely that it's going to disappear completely. It will always look like this, basically. The time that it could have been repaired seamlessly has passed long ago. This is just a structural thing more than a cosmetic thing. The other thing is aligning the two halves together and pushing everything back down so that it lays completely flat without doing extensive refinishing is virtually impossible. So it's just a wound that we're going to heal up, and it'll get back in action. Does it matter what kind of glue you use? I'm not sure. I like a protein-based glue myself, hide glue or fish glue, because they have this quality where as the glue cures or dries, it tends to contract in on itself. So it has the effect of pulling the two halves together tighter. And I think you get a tighter looking seam. Might not be structurally any different from using tight bond or something else, but it's traditional. So I'm using the fish glue today because it's cool in the shop and it's a long crack. Little suction cup pushes the glue through to the other side. There are more elaborate versions of this that use they're pneumatic, they use an air compressor. And there are handheld ones as well. The suction cup cost me $1 for a package of 4, so if you happen to have a crack like this in your guitar and you want to get it repaired and you're feeling a little ashamed at the condition of your guitar, please don't buff it with car wax. That happened once. And I looked at it and I said, hey, what's all this white stuff in it? And he said, well, I just, I wanted to clean it up before you got it. And I'm like, not a great idea. You can't put wax in something you want to glue. This clamp just squeezes things from the sides, provides a little bit of pressure. I use a strip of plexiglass as a clamping caul to press the two halves of the joint and try and keep them level. Similar things happen in the upper bout. When removing the bridge pins, I heard this weird crackly sound. Looked inside and seems like a factory original piece of masking tape was still somewhat attached to the bridge pad, probably used to prevent blowout when drilling the holes. It's vintage. I should save it in the case. We'll try and get rid of the onboard fuzz circuit. It's time to make some cleats. I'll plane some spruce down to about 1.5 millimeters thick, about a 1/16 of an inch. A couple passes to bevel the edges on those. I'll saw them into diamonds or squares. Sand the other edges. So they'll be ready to glue in using magnets. I use the tiniest piece of double stick tape to hold them in place on the magnet. And I've filed notches into the wood handles so I can keep track of how they're oriented when I'm inside working blind. To lower the action, I'll sand material off the bottom of the saddle. If I want to lower it a specific distance at the 12th fret, I need to remove double that from the saddle base. I find it helps to use a sanding block sometimes and my small shooting board. It's easier on the fingers. I took the time to file back the area of the B string too so that it would intonate better. Polishing, polishing, polishing. We'll have a look at these. They glued up pretty tight. There are paint techniques that can better disguise this kind of repair, but the time involved makes them too expensive for most guitars. I'm going to give the board a little oil. The saddle had originally been shaped so that all the strings came off the leading edge, the very front of it, which left the bass ones playing pretty sharp. So I reshaped that so the takeoff points were better placed. Okay, this is set to go. Overall impression? The build quality on this is pretty impressive. It might be a little bit over braced, but that's probably better than under braced on these. The fact that there's still this much saddle height available is kind of amazing, actually, on a guitar of this size and this vintage. And yeah, set up really nicely. It's 5.5 on the bass side, 4 and a bit on the treble, and ready to go for another 40 years. Keeping in the realm of 70s Japanese flat tops, and also continuing the series on Canadian guitar brands, we have a Mansfield. These came out of Montreal, and they were a store brand for Pete's Music Store. P-E-A-T-E. Family business, venerable music store. I think they just, literally, in the last couple of years, closed up because I can't find their website anymore, which is sad because they'd been around forever, like the turn of the 20th century. This is a story that almost exactly parallels the Ibanez tale we discussed a few weeks back, involving the same company. This is another Hoshino Gaki product, essentially the same as the lawsuit Ibanez's. Pete's wanted its own label. They went to Japan, they had these made up, and they became the distributor in Canada. So, you know, it's a low-end import, but it looks nice. Beautiful rosewood veneer on this thing. Laminated top. I believe they offered them to other Canadian music stores as well, including Payne's Music here in Hamilton. I think I remember seeing one of these with a Payne's label. It's lost a little bit of lacquer because it got bumped on the side here. The owner wants me to seal that up so it won't spread. And we'll do what we can to set it up too. I'm really hoping this thing has a functional truss rod in it because there's an awful lot of neck relief. And the plate here says reinforced neck. And that's cause for concern because those are the words you use when you don't want to put in an adjustable rod. I won't be fooled so easily this time. Truss rod plate. This has a Gibson-esque adjustable saddle. It likely isn't. The screw heads probably just sit on top of the bridge here with very limited travel. We'll see. The action is 8/64 on the bass side, 6 on the treble. If we can lower it, I'll have to extend the string ramps forward a bit so that we can get better downward angle on the high E and B strings. Does this all sound familiar? It should, because it's what I have to do on all of these 70s Gibson-style bridges. What's really interesting is this bridge has been plugged. It seems to be factory. It runs through the position of the pins. That's weird. Let's check the scale length. Yeah, it's like 25 1/8. And, I mean, this original slot would work for 25 1/2. So maybe they were using up stock from another model. Seems like a lot of trouble to go to when rosewood was like, that bridge was less than 50 cents. I'm guessing this is fairly early in their run, probably late 60s, early 70s. It's a W117, which doesn't appear in the mid-70s catalog I found online. They carried a whole range of Martin and Gibson clones, both acoustic and electric, banjos too. At the time of publication, which I think is around 1975, only their mahogany D18 had an adjustable saddle. Different model numbers too. Little handwritten serial number there on the top in pen that starts with 69, so conceivably 69. Interesting. This is a 0 fret model, and the nut here is, it's not a brass nut. It seems to be steel or maybe highly polished aluminum, which I can't imagine staying that highly polished over 50 years, so I'm guessing it's steel. There is a truss rod. So do I lop off a chunk of my 5mm Allen wrench, or do I cut away a little piece? Make it easy on the next person. Yeah, I'm going to cut away a piece. Well, yeah, no, you do want to be careful. Like, don't drill through the back of the headstock. Charge up your drill, too, before you try this. I got a pair of these drills. They're Sears Craftsman 14.4. I think I got them in the year 2005. And they haven't given up yet, so I feel loyal to them. Okay, with that adjustment, I got the relief down to about 10 thousandths, and the action came down to 6 on the bass and 5 on the treble, which is pretty much fine. The issue is, of course, we've got the 0 fret there. And it's got strings that are too low. Got to replace it. I'd like another half 64th on the treble side. See if that does anything. I don't think it does. Yeah, no, it's bottomed out. So 5/64 is probably where it's going to stay. I've heard from a couple of different people, different times, different places, that you don't need a higher piece of fret wire for a 0 fret. In other words, it could be the same and you just dress them all at the same time and the sort of trigonometry takes care of things. In my experience as a repair guy, that's not really true, because it seems that the 0 fret tends to wear faster because you've got strings gliding across it every time you tune. And for whatever reason, just, geometry doesn't account for everything. Checking the height, it looks like it's around 30 thousandths in the center. Slightly less, slightly more, 32 thousandths. So I'm going to replace it with a fret that's about 39 thousandths tall and dress it down if need be. I'll tap the new one in and then dress down the ends, getting the bulk off before finishing them with a smaller file. ABP, baby. Always be polishing. The Dremel brand rotary tool makes quick work of lengthening the string slots. For the traumatic finish avulsion, I'll apply a number of coats of thin viscosity super glue. It'll wick under the loose edges, and also it builds up faster than lacquer. It cures much quicker. I don't think these guitars were finished with common nitrocellulose, because it doesn't melt under exposure to lacquer thinner or acetone. I think it may have been one of the first generation catalyzed urethanes. They managed to keep it very thin, which is a real trick with that stuff. Now I've got a brand new razor blade with tape. What have you got? There are different ways of doing this. I like to knock it down a bit before using the abrasives. A whole bunch of sanding with very fine grits. Then a bit of a rub with some auto body compound. Now, of course you can still see where it was, but it's smooth and it's not going to flake off anymore. With the new 0 fret, some of the strings are a little bit high over the first fret now. So I'll dress those down a little bit. It seems like half the fret ends on the treble side were loose and coming up, so I have to glue those down. I wax off along the sides of the affected frets, wick in some super glue, and slap a capo on to clamp it. Is this a fabulous piece of Japanese workmanship? Maybe, I don't know. I will point out that the hole for the A string post is drilled farther in towards the middle of the headstock than the others, such that your D string is almost always going to be banging against it. In fact, at least it's bilaterally symmetrical. But, it's a learner's guitar. Okay, verdict on this one? Well, just sort of a cheap and cheerful laminated top guitar from a time when you could spend 150 or 200 bucks and get your kids something brand new to start learning on. Perfectly playable. Decent volume.